Hey everyone, it's Jennifer and thanks for stopping by once again. Today's video shows some new products from Hero Arts in Basic Gray called the Grand Bazaar line. And I will also be showing you how to combine embossing paste and embossing powders for a fun pearl kind of raised background that you see here. I'll also share some tips for doing metallic embossing on vellum. And I will have a special guest at the end of this video, so stay tuned. So let's first start with the background. I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock, and I'm just going to tape it to my work surface with a couple pieces of painter's tape. Now I have this new stencil from Hero Arts in Basic Gray. I love it, but it's got a lot of detail to it, and I don't want it to mess up when I put the paste over it. So what I'm going to do is I took it outside and I sprayed it a few times with this temporary adhesive. That gives it just enough stick, kind of like a stick that you get on a Post-it note, just enough stick to hold it in place over my paper. And I don't have to worry about any of the edges of the stencil kind of lifting up as I'm working with it. I really think this makes a big difference. You can wash it off, but I just leave the stick on because I'm going to be using the stencil over and over again anyways. I also decided to put some painter's tape on here just to make sure. I didn't want it to mess up when I was working with it. So now I have some Wendy Vecchi white embossing paste. I love this stuff. It doesn't break, it doesn't crack, it's nice and soft. It's great for backgrounds, and I love the look of it white on a background. However, today I'm going to do something a little special with it. So I'm going to first use my tool here to make a nice even coverage over the stencil. Notice that I'm always kind of going in the same direction. I feel that gives better results. And I'm just kind of smoothing it out over the surface of the stencil so that I get nice even coverage. Any extra you can scrape back into your embossing paste bottle. Make sure you put the cap on right away so it doesn't dry out. Now the stencil, I'm going to take this and wash this off quickly so that it doesn't dry on the stencil. And then we have our background. And this is really beautiful white on white, but I'm going to do something a little special today. I'm going to actually add a pearl embossing powder to it. It just makes it look beautiful in real life. So this is a Wow embossing powder. I'm using the silver pearl. It looks super cool on dark cardstocks, but on white it's very subtle. Now I'm kind of going crazy and pouring this all over it because I really want the powder to cover all of the embossing paste. So I'm covering it generously, and I'm going to set this aside for about 15 minutes to dry. I want the paste underneath to dry before I add the heat to it. I think this gives better results. Now that it's dried for about 15 minutes, I'm coming back and adding heat from my heat gun to melt the powder that's on top. Now you'll see I'll end up with this like pearly look to it. You could do this with any embossing powders you have, but I just love this one because it gives a little bit of shine to the background. Now you'll see that it kind of bubbles a little bit at first, but then it ends up nice and smooth. If I were to take the heat gun to this powder right away without letting the paste dry a little bit first, the paste underneath would bubble and you get like a molten look, which is cool, but I wanted this to be a little more smooth. Now the reason I did paste over the stencil, then the embossing powder instead of Versamark over the stencil and then the embossing powder is the paste gives it some dimension, and it really makes a big difference. It just gives this great pattern, lots of dimension, and then we've got the pearl embossing powder on top. And look at that gorgeous result that you get. And again, you can use any embossing powders that you may already have. This stencil is definitely one of my new favorites, and I'll be using it quite a bit. I just love how classy it is. Okay, now for some stamping. I'm going to do some metallic embossing on vellum. I have 2 stamp sets from the Grand Bazaar line from Hero Arts in Basic Gray. I've used this image before on a card, and I'll link in my description and here on the video to see that video. I also am going to use just a few different images on this card from the 2 stamp sets. So first I have this large flower. I'm going to stamp it with Versamark ink onto vellum. I'm just using 40-pound basil vellum. Now I'm going to use a variety of metallic embossing powders from Wow. This one's the copper. Now, there are a lot of great embossing powder brands out there. I really like Ranger's, American Crafts are good too. I really like the Wow right now because of 2 big reasons. One is there's a billion different colors and varieties, and also it's very inexpensive. It's like $3 for a little jar of it, I believe. So I'm just going to put some on. I like to use a little spoon to kind of control how much I put down, and I'll tap the rest of it back into the jar, and then watch how cool this copper is on the vellum. I just think it's beautiful, the shine and how smooth and even it gets. Now when embossing on vellum, vellum sometimes wants to warp, so just be careful to warm up your heat gun off of the paper before you bring it to the paper. It just helps to speed up the process and minimize warping. Okay, now I have that flower image where I've just inked up the stem only, and I'm adding green embossing powder to it. And I noticed that this stem is a little bit small for that giant flower I want to add it to. So I'm going to cheat, and this is a great thing to do with embossing. I'm going to take a Versamark pen, and this is just like the ink. It's a clear sticky ink, and I'm going to extend the stem with this pen and then add more green embossing powder. This pen is a great way to fix any embossing that you might have messed up, like add in areas that didn't fill in completely, or to do things like this where you change or alter an image. So I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that. I have also stamped like a circle image from one of the stamp sets. Sorry, I stamped a little low there. And I'm adding a gold metallic embossing powder this time, and I'll heat this one too. Again, you can use any embossing powders on vellum. It just helps to heat up your gun away from the paper before you bring it to the paper, just to prevent warping. Now for the sentiment, I am going to use Ranger's Liquid Platinum. I've mentioned before this is one of my favorites. It's like a warm silver, and it's just beautiful. It seems to work with just about any card. Now I wanted to show you one of my favorite tricks with embossing powder. Say you don't get a real crisp image when you're doing the embossing, like some of this is sticking out here, just take a craft knife and gently scrape it off, and nobody will ever know the difference. It's a great way to clean it up if it got kind of messy like I did here. I decided to cut these out, leaving a little bit of a trim around the edge. I just found that was easier, and I like that look of the vellum kind of floating around the embossed image. So now that we have all our stamped images, let's finish up the card. Now, one of the things I like about using Hero Arts and Basic Gray products is there's the stamps, the stencils, the pattern papers, and the embellishments that all go together. So I'm going to add some pattern paper to this card too. I really love pattern papers, and I always forget to use them, but I like Basic Grays a lot because there's a lot of great tone-on-tone patterns like this one here, and a little strip really can make a big difference on a card. So I'm just gluing a strip along the edge, and I just thought this would be a fun way to add a little something to the card. Now it's time to go ahead and add our embossing paste panel to the card. I kind of went crazy there with the adhesive. You really don't need that much. And I just like how that embossing paste pattern from the stencil kind of matches the pattern paper that's in the same line. Okay, so now I'm going to assemble all of my embossed pieces on it, and I felt like I needed something along that pattern paper strip to give it a finished look. And I wanted an embossed, a silver paper strip. So this is what I did. I took some Versamark to the edge of some white cardstock, and I'm going to go ahead and add the liquid platinum embossing powder to that. And this will match the greeting. It'll kind of tie the whole card together. You'll see this is kind of messy. It doesn't matter one bit. I'll go ahead and heat set this, and I'm going to end up with basically a metallic paper when I'm done. So you'll see as I heat emboss this, it gives this gorgeous look that perfectly matches the greeting. So I'm just going to take my paper trimmer and cut a thin strip from this. I'll actually get 3 little thin strips from this, and I can save 2 of them for a future card if I want to. But this thin little strip of embossed paper will perfectly match my all my stamping and kind of tie the card together and give it a nice finished look. I've done this many times before in videos where I ink up a strip to perfectly match a stamped image, but here I just covered it with embossing powder instead. Okay, so now to add these pieces, I'm going to use some clear foam tape behind these stamped vellum pieces. It didn't seem to show through that much, which I think is a good thing, and I thought having the dimension behind it just makes it pop a bit more. Now I am going to line up my flower image that I have here, this embossed image, with the flower that's in the stenciled background. It just kind of pulls the card all together. And I'll also use a small piece of this clear foam to add the center to the flower. So we have lots of different colors of metallic embossing powder going on here, and then we have the pearl embossing powder in the background. And I think it just adds a lot of contrast, a lot of interest to what's otherwise a pretty simple card. Okay, now here's my special guest. I have Lila helping me now. I was working on this card while she was sleeping, and then it was time for her to get up, and I just had these finishing touches to do. So I normally don't work when she's awake, but I just needed to finish this up. So that's why she's joining me here. Now what I'm doing is I wanted some silver pearls. So I'm taking my T5 Copic marker to color my pearls. I just scribble across it very quickly, and it gives it like a silvery look. So you could use Sharpies or any permanent marker for this, and I just put a little cut between the adhesive and just pick it up and add it to my card. I'm going to put one large one in the center, and I'm going to save those others to scatter on the card. At this point, I'm still trying to figure out where everything is going to land when I assemble it. And by the way, you can see that she's having fun with my clear stamps, so she likes Basic Gray too, I guess. And she's not a fan of sharing my space here either. If you, every once in a while, look at, she pushes me away. Anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and add this greeting strip, by hiding my adhesive behind my embossed message here. So I'm just using tiny little touches of this multi-matte medium. You could, or multi-medium in the matte finish. You could also use glossy accents, but you want to try to keep the adhesive only behind the greeting so it doesn't peek through. And this is a great way to add this greeting to this bumpy background. Okay, sorry, she's getting a little gutsy here. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim off the extra, and there we have that piece down. And now I just need to add a little bit of adhesive in the same way behind my stem. I'll go ahead and put a heavy book on this so I can make sure that it dries nicely on the bumpy background. Again, sorry that we have a little guest here, but see, she likes stamps just as much as her mommy does. Okay, so I added the little pearls kind of scattered around it, and there we have our finished card using all the new Hero Arts and Basic Gray products together. I also wanted to mention that this card is part of the Hero Arts Basic Gray blog hop, where they are celebrating this new collection of products. Be sure to click over to my blog because there are going to be a ton of great cards from some great artists along with some prizes. As always, I've linked the products I've used to multiple stores in my YouTube description, or you can go over to my blog for much more information. Thanks so much for stopping by, and Lila thanks you for letting her play along too. We'll see you next time.